Broadcasting from the world headquarters of the National Floor Safety Institute is America's slip and fall guy, Russ.
This is America's slip and fall guy, Russ Kenzior. Thanks for listening to my podcast. Oftentimes, as a safety professional, people wonder, gosh, if only people cared more about other people. You see it all the time where, whether it be in the workplace or your average day where you'll find a hazardous condition, wet floor, something on the floor, some type of a trip hazard, that people just kind of walk right by. They pay no attention to it and ultimately expose other people to a otherwise preventable injury. Joining us today is Dr. Mark Fagiano, professor at University of Central Florida and founder of the Empathy Vision Company, which works in the virtual reality space. Mark, welcome to the show.
Hi, Russ. Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about the Empathy Project, and really what that subject covers.
Right. Well, when you talk about empathy, it's pretty interesting because you'll find that a lot of people define it differently, and this can cause a little bit of a difficulty. For instance, what's the difference between empathy and sympathy and compassion or benevolence, and what exactly does empathy mean? I'm not trying to be overly philosophical, but just this is how it is out on the streets. Like, what does it mean to be empathic? So my project, what I've done is looked at different definitions and different employments of the word empathy over time and come up with my own idea about the notion for a practical reason, so that it can serve certain interests and it can resolve problems. So what I've come up with is an idea called relational empathy, which has three parts. The first part we get really from like 200 years ago during the Enlightenment period, of a notion of empathy as feeling into your environment. So people call it projective empathy. You feel into your environment and you are aware, or you try to become aware of something in the environment. And the second dynamic, I guess you could say, of this type of empathy is that you're trying to grasp or be one with that thing in the environment. Or you're trying to understand it, you're trying to feel with it. And then the third dynamic is really trying to care, or actually caring about it. So feeling for that thing. So I can be aware of something, like say there's a cone that's tipped over in a parking lot and it's dangerous, and I don't do anything about it. I don't I don't care about the fact that it's there. So just because I have an understanding of it doesn't mean I have the care involved. So this new type of empathy I'm trying to use now and make it or bring it into a bunch of different courses and virtual reality experiences where people can experience different sorts of hazards and be able to recognize in that space dangers that present themselves to us every day.
Now, you authored a paper. Was it last year? Actually, you won an award for your publication on this subject. Tell us a little bit about what that paper was about.
Yeah, so I was very grateful. It was an international award on the subject of empathy, and I explained my theory in this work, and it won. And I was pretty excited, and you know, it's one of those things I think that maybe might have put it apart from others, is that I wasn't just thinking about it as an intellectual thing, like what if and what create a debate about empathy in terms of some scholarly debate, but trying to create a theory of empathy based on what people have said historically, and then one that is also functional. And I think that the committee realized, actually they said it was novel and useful, that the theory was novel and useful to be able to actually resolve problems. It's quite different than thinking of terms. I mean, people can have debates about what things mean, and that's all fun till the cows come home. Yeah, it's all sort of like justice. One can have a debate about what justice is and never come to a resolution. But with this particular definition of empathy, this way of thinking about empathy, it actually works in experience. My argument is that it does things. And one of the things it does is it creates a foundation to be able to create any simulated experience to be able to teach people about how to be empathic on a day-to-day basis, whether at work or at home or wherever they may be.
It's interesting that whenever somebody becomes injured, and it's human nature, you tend to want to blame somebody. You'll say something like, well, gee, how did they, why did they leave that floor wet? Or why didn't they, fix the damaged tile? There's always kind of this outward blame towards somebody else, that it was somebody else's fault that I was hurt. And is that something that you touch upon as well in your work?
Well, a lot of times people will blame when they feel like they're going to have consequences, right? So if the question is, what about, thinking about in terms of consequences, the answer is yes. I mean, they create the habit specifically to avoid or to produce consequences, right? We don't want to have people in the place where, well, if only this person, and I could have blamed this person, we don't want to put that people in those positions. We can avoid that and with some forethought and think in terms of what are the possible consequences of not having a safe environment. And believe me, it's bad, not just for the people's own mind and their own guilt, but as far as hurting other people, but in terms of, an organization. It's extremely costly to, and OSHA requires, their general duty clause that companies keep or do everything they can. They're not going to tell you what to do, but they do everything they can to show that they're keeping a safe environment. It's actually the law.
Right. Well, how do you go about teaching somebody to care, or what I like to say, give a damn? How do you train somebody to give a damn if they really don't inherently care?
Sure. So I believe that, and I think neuroscience shows that we are our habits. We are what we repeatedly do. It's nothing special from neuroscience. I mean, Aristotle said it a long time ago. William James said it a long time ago. We are what we repeatedly do. So, to teach someone to care is, first of all, to teach them that it's important, maybe by showing what the possible consequences of not caring. But it's also a way of being in the world. Caring is a way of being in the world. It's a way of acting. It's a way of interacting. And there are certain habits that are involved in those forms of interacting. So, for instance, you can imagine when I first met you, Russ, we walked around Emory University. Remember that?
Yeah.
And this is when I was just learning about safety situations and trying to create a safe environment. And all of a sudden, I don't know, we were probably like 150 yards out. And Russ, you pointed and you looked and you said, look at that mat over there. There was this folded mat. I couldn't even see it. You had like x-ray eyes. There was this little mat that was folded, and whoever put it down didn't put it down properly. So it had a little fold in it, and it was a trip hazard. So recognizing those trip hazards, bam, I mean, you're really in the habit of doing that. So to be able to teach others to do the same, they have to create habits of looking for trouble as if it's second nature. It's not something you try to do, like maybe today I'll go out and look for something and be careful and make sure everything's safe. It is second nature. You're always doing it. So you have to create within others the habits of doing so. The problem is that when you try to teach mostly today, when you try to teach safety, no one listens. I mean, they're out to lunch. Imagine if it's like a PowerPoint. You can imagine someone going to a safety PowerPoint. They're not listening, right? And even when you're tested on these sorts of things, you jump. I don't know how it is in other organizations, but people usually jump to the end of the test. And then they'll try to take the test before they even read anything. They don't want to do these sorts of things, and they're not learning. You can't create habits unless you do. Habits are all about doing things. So safety training modules today that just intellectualize or conceptualize the best thing to do, or to tries to tell you, when people try to tell you what to do just by, conceptualizing it, that just does not work. There's no evidence in sciences today that shows that works. And on the contrary, what works is actually doing the activity that promotes safety.
Yeah, repeatedly. I mean, you have to repeatedly do it over and over and over. It kind of becomes second nature. And you're right. I mean, you have to, you know me. You'll have to excuse my sickness, where I'm always looking for floor hazards, and they're everywhere. When you start looking, you find slip and trip hazards all the time. I mean, you see them everywhere, and we just kind of take it for granted that that's kind of the way it is. Well, that's not the way it should be. Just because that's what we find in our environments doesn't make it right. Especially whether it's in the workplace or even at home. Bad habits lead to unsafe practices, and then that event will take place, and that's a big struggle that those in the safety industry have, is getting people to care, getting people, as I like to say, to give a damn, training them in a way that works for them. We're past models where you sit somebody down behind a DVD player, pop in a video, tape or CD-ROM on safety, which puts most people to sleep. That just doesn't work today with younger people, the millennial generation, the Gen Z generation, who all have smartphones and laptops and iPads, tablets, etc. Which kind of segues into your new project, the whole VR experience, where you're now using virtual reality as a way to train people in empathy. Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah, that's right. And it's been a long time coming, because there's different approaches to that. And my particular method involves the combination of many different technologies from around the world. A lot of times, recently people have been trying to create VR systems for training that are very much in a cartoon-like environment. Like you imagine, like you put on a headset and it's like a cartoon. Most people just want to play games, which is fine. But I found that it needs to be as realistic as possible, because people did not take it seriously when it was cartoonish, computer generated. They took it seriously when it was realistic. So there's an assortment of different technologies I am using from different parts of the world to combine together to create experiences that are embodied. And that's the key word. How do you put people in embodied, simulated experience where they're actually having a reaction, having a feeling? It's not just a conceptual, oh, yes, that's a good idea, or yes, let's not have people fall. That would be just terrible. But to actually see in this VR experience the conditions and have to find the dangers and the hazards viscerally, and you have visceral reactions. And one of them, this is what Russ, as you gave me this idea, is to create a situation like for a test in which someone has to find the hazard before somebody falls. So it's sort of like a game like that. When people are engaged like that with games, engaged with something like it's fun, every single person is smiling ear to ear. And I tell you what, I think places where I've learned before, whenever they want me to go do something because it's a compliance thing, we're not smiling in those situations.
Right.
These people are smiling ear to ear. They're in this world probably for the first time, and it's fun. And it's fun. It's not telling you, and nowhere in it does it say, okay, you have to be like this. It just repeats the habit. It creates in the brain what is naturally creating an experience. The habit of looking, the habit of being aware, of grasping difficulty, and then caring about it. Right? So those habits are ingrained in these VR experiences. They're realistic. And another great thing is that everyone has a good time. Everyone's enjoying it. And I think that people generally learn much better when they don't feel like they're forced to do something.
Yeah.
They're they're having a good time, they're enjoying it, they're entertained to some extent.
Well, and again, you're bringing your experience as a professor in the classroom, where you can't just reiterate information or read from a book and keep your students' interest. You have to engage them at the level they're at, and really make it relevant. I mean, you're teaching what is it, freshmen, sophomores, early young college students who may or may not, want to be in your class. It's one of those, we have to take philosophy 101 or whatever the issue is. Because, as someone that's spoken in your classrooms in the past, both at Emory and at UCF, I've seen the student body. I understand what your hurdles are, so to speak, regarding teaching a generation of young people that just need to be, and maybe use the right word, entertained. They need to be brought into the situation. Now, the good news is millennials, Gen Zs are very environmentally conscious, very socially conscious, very safety conscious. I mean, they are highly motivated. And in the one experience that you shared with me that you did for a hospital, and you may want to talk about this. I mean, I was just blown away. I put the headset on and I was in their hospital with them. I mean, it was as if, if assuming I would be a worker at that hospital, I would put the headset on and see my environment, my work environment, not like you said, not a wireframe or a cartoon, type of image, but actually you put the employer, the worker, in their environment, and talk a little bit about that project, if you could, the hospital project that you're working on.
Sure, right. Well, they came to me with a list of problematic situations. So situations with OSHA, right, that have been whether OSHA violations or whether they were particular things that actually happened. There were injuries that actually happened, slip, trips, and falls. People might think about it in the abstract, but they happen every day. And so we actually recreated and filmed those situations, those hazards, and then gave multiple ways of dealing with it. So the experiencer goes in and they're walking around and they're searching for something, and then there you go. There was the hazard. There was one of the hazard of the 20 or whatever we put in. There's the hazard that they actually experienced on their property. So this is a custom made. We don't do boilerplate stuff. This is custom made to their hospital, right? To their needs. A lot of times people can just think about this in the abstract, but when you are embodied again in a place where you're familiar, like, oh yeah, there are those cords that are by the phone. I've seen that those are sometimes stretched out for a certain way, for certain reasons. I should be aware of that. And then that clicks the next time they're in the experience. And then we added other things just by doing a survey. So we go in, we did the custom filming, and then I looked around and started thinking about other possible things just by examining the environment. And then, one of the things is if you talk about for there, it's like, if you talk about a slip, trips, and falls, it's like a nice little like slip, trips, and falls. It goes together and like, well, wait a second, what's the difference between this? And so they're able to actually notice different hazards that would be, for instance, a slip, a trip, a fall, or a combination of two or more of those, right? They could be equally, like a slip could be a fall hazard as well. So just knowing those things and recognizing them. But it's not always something where you just like in the video, just like, okay, there it is. And it's not a tricky test at all. It's not trying to be deceptive, but you really have to be able to observe certain things sometimes in those experiences to make sure. Like one of them is just a situation where we put all these things in the room and slip, trip hazards, and they get to select all of them. And then there's one more and they can't find it. And they're looking all over. And if they don't get it, they don't get an F. No one responds to that. No one fails. You just got to find it. You just got to get the habit right. There's no F, there's no A's, there's nothing. They're just getting the habits. So then it keeps flipping around. It keeps, the auto playing again. It plays over and over until you get all of them. And then you turn up, and then it turns out you just have to look up. And it turns out the lights were out. So this is, you talk about surveying a scene for slip, trips, and falls. You have to look everywhere, right? And so this teaches you to be aware, to be mindful of your surroundings, to locate what's problematic, and then to care enough to do something about it, right?
It's funny you say that, because for those who are not familiar with a virtual reality environment where you put the headset on, I think you use the Oculus. I use the Oculus headset. Literally everywhere you turn your head, you're seeing a different location within the room. And so, like you mentioned, looking up, when you turn your head up, you literally are looking at the ceiling. It's really just a remarkable technology. I saw the cameras that you used, the 360-degree cameras, which really puts the individual in their environment. Now, you made another good point. If they don't find it, it's not as if they fail, but somebody might get hurt. I mean, the opportunity for an injury to take place goes up because, well, they missed it. And if they missed it once, because maybe they just didn't know. I mean, that's a big issue in safety, is people simply don't know any better. They think, what's normal in their environment is, well, it's normal. It's okay. It's always like that. It's kind of like my mom. I'll never forget growing up, and we had a basement, and you go to mom's house after everybody's kind of grown up, and you go to visit mom. You open up the basement door, and the light over the stairs is burned out. And you'll say, "Mom, the light over the stairs are burned out. You want me to put a light bulb in there?" And she'll say, "Yeah, okay, whatever." See, it's been that way for her for so long. She just got used to it. The burned out light bulb, which really does present a serious fall potential, to her was normal. You see the same thing in homes where people will have throw rugs in front of their kitchen sinks, and to them it's just normal. Well, a throw rug is easily bunched up, curled up, buckled, and is just a terrible potential trip hazard, especially at night if you're going to the restroom and you're not paying attention, or maybe shuffling your feet. And so what people think is normal, or what they see every day, is really what you're talking about, being able to recognize. Take that normal hazard and make it stand out. Make it something that people pay attention to and don't just accept in their daily work. Now, back to your hospital. You're doing like every room in the hospital, right? I mean, it's kind of like a virtual audit or virtual tour where you start in the parking lot. You have to pass the exam, so to speak, in the parking lot before you get into the front entrance. And then, does this go throughout the entire hospital, Mark?
Well, they chose 5 locations, and so basically we film per location, and those were the top 5 that they found necessary to create this. One of their big problems was the stairs, actually. Even though they have signs that say, please hold the stair rail, they have a lot of people coming up to the hospital up these stairs, and they had a lot of injuries in there. So what can, you figure, like, well, the people are coming up the stairs, they could have went around. There's different ways to access. They could have got dropped off. It's not our fault. I mean, we put the signs there. But thinking like that is just like, we've done enough, but that's not what they wanted. They wanted more. They wanted to make sure that their employees participated in continual prevention. It's really preventative. And so we filmed some things where, somebody was walking while texting, and one of the employees came up and said, "Hey, be careful on the stairs. They're really sharp." Just in a really kind way, a little thing, one little good piece of advice, it goes a long way. It could even save a life. One of the times there was this kid that was running up the stairs because his mother was dying, and same sort of thing. Just saying small things to people, just small reminders, but also making sure people know or recognize that there are dangers present. Just that little bit. If you have the whole team at the hospital doing that, guarantee the problems are going to go way down. Because it's something that's second nature. They're not thinking like, "Oh, who's going to go on slip, trip, and fall prevention today?" There's no one. It's everyone. It's everyone, because you just get into the habits. You get into the habits of looking for things, and so then in this term, like care caring for others becomes second nature. It's not even really much of an intention. Once you intend to build the habits of care and concern and compassion for others, you just have it happen. It just becomes second nature. You just do it. You don't even have to think intending like, I'm going to go up and I'm going to care for these people. I'm going to be careful that no one gets hurt. It's just part of your nature. It really is a habitual, but creating habits is the part, because once you get into the habits, you realize that it becomes part of your character.
It's another issue that comes up a lot is you find bad habits by companies where, or individuals for that matter, where they tend to blame somebody. It's somebody else's fault. It's, you didn't do this and therefore, I got hurt. It's kind of like what I oftentimes lecture on called the blame game. Everybody else is at fault. It's not my fault. It's somebody else's fault. That's the root of a lot of litigation. Somebody might get hurt on a premises and think that they're entitled to some, cash settlement. Well, that's not the case. Just because you're hurt somewhere doesn't mean there was a defendant that was negligent. But talk a little bit about, I guess, the opposite of empathy is blame. Blaming tends to be habitual. People tend to, play that game of, well, it's never my fault or it wasn't my job. There's a maintenance guy who's in charge of cleaning up spills. And so, I don't need to clean that spill up. That's somebody else's job. And so how does the relationship between empathy and blame kind of play itself out?
Well, that's a great question. I think to answer it, we begin to start what's at the font, what's at the groundwork of blaming. And I think it is fear. It's fear that I am going to either lose my job or get in trouble, right? So therefore, I'll blame someone else. And those sorts of things are self-preserving. It's trying to say that I did my work. Sometimes, people in jobs, they'll say, I did my part. I know my rules. I know what I'm supposed to do. So it's not my responsibility. But guess what? It's everyone's responsibility. Keeping other people safe, that's everyone's responsibility. But I think the notion of blaming others is really a defense mechanism in order to make sure that one is himself or herself not blamed, and then the consequences that follow from that, whether that's losing a job or whatever might happen. I think that's really what it is. It comes from a fear of not wanting to be the person responsible. But when people realize that we're all responsible, when you step outside, even if you're not on a job, you're responsible for others. We're always socially responsible. When you start thinking that in terms of every day, then maybe, the idea that you're going to try to blame someone would diminish. But I really think the act of blaming someone, well, it's that person's job or that person's job, it comes from a source of fear of getting in trouble, right? Being punished by a boss or losing a job, right? I think it really does stem from that. So what a good way of being about getting around it is just to continue to practice those habits of empathy, of care. And instead of saying it's someone else, like, shoot, I could have been there. And next time I'm going to look more carefully. Those are two different responses.
It's funny because when you first told me about the project, this hospital project, I thought, well, gosh, who would think that going to a hospital can be that dangerous. You go to the hospital to be, cared for, not to be injured. But, part of it is because, and I've worked in so many different industries, people they just see hazards all the time. They just take it for granted. It's not that they don't care. It's just, that's just the way it is. And they just kind of ignore it. Maybe they just block it out subconsciously. I shouldn't say ignore it. They just don't see it because it's there all the time. A good example is wet floor signs. And when you came to the NFSI a number of years ago for some training, we spent time talking about removing the wet floor sign when the floor is no longer wet. You only post wet floor signs if the floor is wet. They're a temporary measure. They're a temporary warning. The goal is to make the floor so it's not wet and remove the signs. Well, most companies don't. They simply keep the wet floor sign out all the time, all day, 24/7, thinking somehow, I guess, that, that would prevent them from getting sued in the event somebody got hurt. Well, the problem is you're warning people with a wet floor sign to a floor that's not wet and therefore not hazardous. And so people just learn to ignore them. They just don't pay attention to the signs. And so manufacturers of wet floor signs will make bigger signs, pink signs, green signs, talking signs. Well, it doesn't really matter. If you're using the sign the wrong way, you're warning for hazards that don't exist. People just tune them out. And I guess that's a good example of what you're trying to overcome in your work, is getting people, getting businesses, training workers to be able to identify these hazards in a way that they can take preventative measures early on. So it's kind of seamless. This shouldn't be a debate. Everybody in the workplace, as you said, and I agree, has a social responsibility. And so, but they don't oftentimes know what that means. What am I supposed to do? But it seems like you've really, your work now is really trying to address that. I know we've been talking about the hospital project, but this is something that's still kind of new. Is that fair to say? You're one of the kind of early pioneers in really promoting this type of education, training, virtual reality, type of providing information. Is that a fair way to put it? I mean, you're the first that's kind of linking this concept of empathy to a tangible product, a training program. Is that a good way to look at it?
Yes, it's pretty new. But I would say that there are other people out there doing it. But in terms of not, I would say as an educator, I see my own products a little bit more superior because they are, it's not just about, okay, you got a virtual reality camera and you can set up a scene and go. It's about knowing about human psychology, right? It's about trying to knowing how to create tests and try to that are in the actual experience, not some boring Scantron you take afterwards. So the educational and the psychological dynamics of creating it, I think I do something unique. Also bringing in the idea of empathy. My theory of empathy is extremely important because, in terms of how one becomes aware, I could create a safety video and say, okay, here you have to be careful of this, this, and that. But if I'm not trained, or I don't get trained along the way as a careful observer, as a careful interpreter of the environment, then it's all for nothing, really. And it's funny you mentioned the thing about the wet floor sign. And there's another example, is that there was recently a lawsuit that was placed against a company that left a floor sign out too long. I think it was a few days or so, and they actually got sued because of someone tripped over the floor sign. So a lot of these things, it's not just what people tell you, but learning to use your own judgment. If someone's in an organization or in a hospital and they see a floor sign, it's been there for 7 days in the same spot and there's nothing wrong, then they should be responsible to tell the people in charge of them, right? And to make a difference, and to believe that oneself, that your actions can make a difference, even if you don't ever see it. I was an ocean lifeguard when I was younger and could move a little bit faster than now. And I remember the first thing they taught us, is Long Beach lifeguards, the first thing they taught us is preventative lifeguarding, right? Preventative. You prevent drownings. If you see somebody drowning, you're kind of already too late. You need to create the conditions of safety, create the conditions where people aren't going to begin to drown. And so as far as I made like 10 rescues a summer, but as far as like those types of rescues, probably 1,000. It could have been 1,000 of those people that could have drowned or nearly drowned because I didn't do things to prevent it. And having the forethought to prevent an accident, or slip, trip, and fall in this example is really important. And I'm telling you, these VR, these virtual reality experiences are really engaging. People, when I let them see it, it's like, I don't even think they think they're learning. They don't even believe they're learning. It's like, it's not like a video game, but it's an experience, and everybody's smiling ear to ear. Now compare that with, like, for instance, how You go to a meeting and you have a PowerPoint and you just sitting back in your chair and maybe writing emails, and you have to be there. So you just continue to listen to the meeting, and it's so boring. No one's listening. You don't learn anything. So those sorts of things are out. They're gone. We need to usher in a time when people are focusing on real life embodied experiences and be able to enjoy that training. So there's actual consequences, and there's actually the creation of safe conditions.
Well, we've been talking with Dr. Mark Fagiano, founder of Empathy Vision. Appreciate the time you've given us, Mark. How can people, how can our listeners get in touch with you if they have an interest in a project or just learning more about what you're doing?
Just call my direct line. That's the best way. 404-291-8181. I'd love to talk to you. And with every single project we create, it's very much catered to what you need. There's no magic bullet. There's no magic formula for everyone. So everything we do, we think about individual situations, right? Every organization has challenges, but there's no blueprint that fits for everyone. So we go in and we do an investigation, and we talk to you about, whether if you've had any OSHA violations or what's been troubling, and then we recreate these scenes with our team of actors and our film crew, and we design this project for you, these training projects for you, and we have a whole bunch of different options available. But the main thing is it's all about what you need, right? What's problematic in your organization, and there's no general one size fits all thing.
Yeah, no cookie cutter approach. It's a individualized training program, which obviously is going to have a tremendous impact when it's personal. When you make safety personal, people understand it. When you make it kind of generic, as you said, boring, nobody wants to be there. Nobody wants to hear that. They tune it out. They're preoccupied. So really thank you and appreciate the work you're doing, Mark. Really, again, appreciate really where this is taking the safety industry in injury prevention. So I'm sure we'll be talking again soon. Again, we've been speaking with Dr. Mark Fagiano, founder of the Empathy Vision. This has been America's Slip and Fall Guy, Russ Kenzior, reminding you to don't let your next step be your last step.